In this video, we're going to be talking about non-planar faces and poles. And these are probably one of the main reasons why people get so many artifacts on their smooth sub-D models. Because even when you have all quads, you can still manage to get deformation and artifacts on your surfaces. So let's talk about non-planar faces. So for example, I have, in its simplest form, a quad here, a simple plane. And if I look at this in orthographic view, completely straight on, all four vertices are completely aligned and on the same plane. Regardless of whether or not this is rotated in a different axis, they're still completely planar. So they're flat. When it's not flat, when it's not planar or coplanar, this is what it tends to look like. And this tends to happen when you're doing manual vertex manipulation or when you are going through using the knife tool and adding in new geometry. So it can cause a lot of surface artifacts. If you see this example here of this nice, simple curved plane, you may think, well, these are not planar. These are kind of curving as they are. But if I rotate this and orbit around, let's isolate so we're just looking at this, okay? And if I hit tab to go into edit mode and select these two vertices, each one of these sets of vertices are completely planar, which is giving us this nice ideal surface. So take this now, press Shift D, move it in the X. Let's press period on the numpad. And now when you start to grab a few of these vertices, so I'll just shift click a bunch of random vertices, then hit Alt S to kind of move on the normal and grab a couple more and move them downward, right? So now we don't have these, and it may seem simple, right? When you have issues like this and when you don't have coplanar faces, it's going to cause a bunch of surface artifacts. And it's especially noticeable on more glossy and reflective surfaces. So you can see the highlight breaking up. So let's switch back to our other matte cap and look at this on actual issues here, okay? Shout out to one of my Discord members, Corey, who sent over this model as we were going through, and I was developing this course, and he was part of my mentorship program. So I gave him kind of early access to some of the content I was making, and this, you better believe, came up. Okay, so what's happening here is if you look at this at first glance, it actually looks pretty fine. And I would say that Corey's model was like 98% of the way there. But what we ended up having on issues like this is you got these coplanar issues. See, it's this really subtle thing that drives us 3D modelers and 3D artists mad, because you're like, why isn't this surface looking the way that it should? Why am I getting this artifact? And if I turn on wireframe, you'll see everything is a great even distribution of edges, holding line, quads, all of this, and yet we're still getting artifacts. And if I look at this with, a different highlight material, you'll see it even more as you're going along with something a little bit more contrasty, like it's coming across there. One of the first things I do when people have this issue is I'll take a look at their model, I'll grab some faces, I'll zoom in, and I'll do this. I'll just start looking at it at these odd angles. And when I'm on Discords or Zooms, people are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm looking for this. Look at this. You kind of get down and you try to get basically almost like parallel or looking down these faces. And this is going to show you where you have these non-planar faces and what's causing these issues, okay? So we know what the issue is. Well, how do we solve it, okay? So let's talk about how to fix this. And to fix this issue, we want to flatten these faces. And because what's going to happen is if you select some faces and right click with loop tools and just do a flatten, it's going to make other faces non-planar. So you want to select kind of the loop of faces, or really the faces that are connected to it as you're going. Because remember, if I go back to this here, you can see that these edges are all planar as they continue to go down the model. So using that, we're going to kind of select these faces as we're going. And sometimes I'll actually need to kind of go in and just move and manipulate these faces here. So if I start to move that in, so I'll start to kind of make these vertices nice and straight. So where I'll kind of move this where that's completely nice and flat, or flatter, I should say. And then that will allow me to now select these sets of faces holding control click. And let's look at it this way, right clicking and doing a flatten, and there you go. So we'll continue that as we select these faces, right clicking and doing a flatten as we move along this model. Now, you may have to do kind of a couple of iterations of this where you're kind of going and flattening to really kind of get rid of these issues. Because now if I look at this kind of from the side here, you can see where we're running into issues. Now I have an example model here that actually, this is the one I created. And if I look at the faces, look at the difference, right? In my model, I keep the faces completely planar. So when you're looking at it here, you don't see any faces or vertices protruding out, right? For example, like if I accidentally move that, those faces are no longer planar here. So again, applying that concept here, we want to make sure that that looks good. And I would say we even want to, like, we're looking at this set of vertices. Now, all of this here, you can actually kind of scale these in the X and excuse me, not the X, the Z and the Y. So you can see where that's kind of causing an issue. So you can kind of get all of that aligned. So I'll just start kind of here and completely remove these vertices, okay? So you can do SZ0, see how it kind of flattens that out, and then SY0, and that kind of also flattens that out. So now we're just kind of making things more planar. Now I'm not going to do it for the whole model, but this should give you a good idea. So now if we're kind of jumping in and out of smooth preview, that's going to help our surface a lot better and make our subdivision behave more predictably, right? And that's what we've been talking about in the course a lot, is the predictability of using sub-D modeling. So if I look at that, and you can see where faces no longer are planar, I can right click, and if I do a flatten, that'll make these completely flat, okay? So now we start to look at it and we're starting to orbit around. At least I fixed the left side of this. I'm not gonna go through and fix everything, but doing that to this surface is going to help fix these issues. So now I'm looking around orbiting, it's starting to smooth things out. Everything's looking really good compared to the left side here, and then compared to the other side. It's one of those subtle things that, you know, I didn't necessarily learn until, like, I just kind of learned it like on the job, and nobody really told me about this. So that's why I was like, well, let me make an entire video devoted to this when we're talking about non-planar faces. And then now let's talk about poles. So poles are another one that can cause distortion and surface artifacts in your models, okay? So if I zoom in, let's look at this series here. So this is just kind of a section from the scope that I modeled here. And if I zoom in, there's really no way around this, right? Because I know based off the reference that we kind of have this bridge piece and we have this extrusion kind of coming up, and there's really nowhere way around it. However, I'm not necessarily protecting this extrusion because of the way that this works, right? Because you may think, well, if I go in here and just kind of cut across, you know, that is in with the way that this is set up, introduces its own series of problems, right? Because if I start to merge that, you're like, oh, well, crap. Like now we run into this issue where it's breaking that form, right? And that's where this pole here, and it's causing kind of, again, I mean, it's causing non-planar faces, all right? So there's a couple of ways to address this, right? Because what's happening here is if I go in and do a bevel, right? And if I do a bevel on all of these together, you get something like this, and it kind of holds up okay, and is honestly, you can get by with pretty much this as it's going. But what made this challenging, and you know, that's why I just love modeling different pieces, is that you have this harder edge running around here and then a softer curve profile here. So in my case, I couldn't just uniformly bevel this, all right? So would anybody notice it besides me? No. But we still have to find solutions and model this as closely as we possibly can. So you can see here with this bevel here, it introduces another set of issues, okay? So my solution to this is you want to minimize your pole and essentially the spread and the impact it has on the rest of the model. And I can't use bevels because if I happened to bevel this, it will change the curvature profile. So if I had something uniform, a bevel could probably work. But I'm just trying to give you context as to, well, now if I take this, Shift D, move it in the X, and let's kind of isolate and just really zoom in on this. Now, what I can do is just Control R, grab my loop cut tool, and just bring in an edge to kind of help reduce the impact. So this is coming back to those concepts that I'm talking about with edge distribution, with mesh density, right? So I'm just making sure that as I increase the amount of edges, I'm really just making sure that I consolidate the area of impact to just a small set of faces, right? Now, if we look at this, we can see that it subdivides much more predictively. And then if I wanted to, I have this geometry now where I can adjust the curvature and the profile of this. Now I have to be careful about moving it up in the Z because now we're getting that non-planar face. So this little corner was causing, I wouldn't say it was causing me a lot of grief, but it was just one of those things that I didn't expect to give me, this much work. So I could also move this up, this edge up here and kind of GG slide that. And you can see now I have two different curvature profiles kind of running around where this is a little bit more curved and this is a bit more sharp kind of running around. So just one way to address these. And this is more just kind of talking about very specific instances. So I want you to understand that this is not like a catch-all. This is very specific to this model, but it is definitely something that warranted me kind of talking about it. So here's another example on this kind of anchor screw piece, right? And we're getting this issue. Why? Because of this bevel right here, okay? So looking at this bevel, it's causing this issue. Not only that, I mean, it is causing this really bad n-gon to appear here. So this is where I would bevel the overall, essentially, silhouette, the edge that runs a silhouette of the model, and then I would manually go in and add in the edge here. So you can see I removed, what exactly am I talking about? This edge right here. This is the problem one if I let Blender bevel this edge here. Actually, let me control click this up to here. And we let that go. And then now we're left with this n-gon here, okay? So this is actually a little bit better because I made sure to go through and kind of clean up some of this geometry. However, it still runs. This is kind of what I ended up with initially, okay? So we have to make sure that we give supporting loops too, because the other thing is, it's all about containing that geometry. You'll notice here, I have these two edges supporting this geometry. If I look at this model, let me turn off viewport visibility. I don't have any of that here. Okay, and that's what's causing a lot of that issue here as well, is because remember, I talked about containing the geometry, containing those poles, containing that deformation. Okay, if you are able to contain this edge here, this edge, and give it the support that it needs, then it will subdivide predictively. Then I make sure that, because this was another interesting one, it kind of comes back to the coplanar thing, where now I have these three or these faces here that are kind of transitioning from curvature to flat, but you make sure that you have flatten and it will go through and flatten that geometry. But all in all, this behaves as intended, subdivides as intended. I don't see any noticeable artifacts, noticeable distortion. Everything's holding up really well. So that's just an example of, a bunch of different instances where I dealt with coplanar faces, non-planar faces, poles, and how to manage poles for your sub-D models. So hopefully you found this helpful. areas of kind of do's and don'ts. Let me know if you want me to dive into this in further detail. Hopefully this gets you set up because now we are about to jump into our next modeling exercise. So I'll see you there.